Hiki ni kipindi chetu cha 4 kwenye topic ya friction, na kwenye kipindi tunaenda kudiscuss kuhusu types of friction. In the previous session tumesoma kuhusu normal reaction ala, na tumediscuss normal reaction in case of horizontal table and in case of inclined plane tunapataje normal reaction ala. Now in this session tunaenda kuendelea with the types of friction, in which we have the static friction and the dynamic friction. So there are two main types of friction, static and dynamic. Static friction occurs when two objects are not moving relative to each other. Now, why static friction occurs? As I said when I started teaching the topic, that when you have the block resting on a table like this way, and then we apply the force. When we apply this force, that means we want the block to start moving. If we want the block to start moving, that means there will be a force opposing it to start motion. That force we call it the static friction. Force opposing the body to start motion. To start motion. It was at rest, then it want to start motion. Force opposing the body to start motion is called the static friction. While the force which opposes the body to continue with motion, imesha start ila ina oppose body to continue with motion, tayari ina move, that is dynamic or kinetic friction. So tuna static friction ambayo yenyewe ni body akiwa kwenye rest, and it acts because the body want to start motion. So we are saying that static friction acts because the body tend to move when a force is applied on it. Body tend to move when a force is applied on it. Kwa hiyo I told you kwamba tukiapply force fulani F kwenye body, yule body atataka kumove. Na by the way, vile body anavyotaka kuanza kumove, then at the same time pia static friction ndio inamzuia ile body. It prevent or it resist the body to start motion. To start motion. That's very important for you to remember. Inazuia kitu kuanza motion. So the initial force to get an object moving is applied mainly to overcome static friction. Tunavyokuwa tunatumia force mwanzoni kufanya kitu kianze kumove ni ili to overcome static friction. Later we'll see the concept of limiting friction. However, limiting friction is just the maximum value of static friction. So static friction in most cases is higher than dynamic friction. Static friction is higher than dynamic friction. Kwa unavyotaka ukianzishe kitu kumove, usiyo na toroli unataka ulianzishe kulisukuma, inakuwa kazi kuliko vile kuliendesha likishaanza kutembea. Kwa nini? Kwa sababu vile unavyolianzisha kusukuma kuna static friction. Lakini likishaanza kutembea kuna dynamic friction, which is smaller. Dynamic friction is smaller as compared to the static friction. But from there we have dynamic friction. Dynamic, or sometimes it is called the kinetic friction. Dynamic, that means it is changing. And even kinetic, that means it is not stationary. Object, they are in motion. So occur when two objects are moving relative to each other and rub against each other. So dynamic friction occurs when two objects, let's say we have our horizontal table, and in this horizontal table, let's say we have this is our horizontal table, and then from this horizontal table you have the block. Let's say you have the block like this way, imeresti hapa, block kama hiyo imeresti hapa kwenye. Sasa if this block has mass mg ni weight, normal reaction R. Then sasa huyu block tunamvuta kwenda hivi with force F, na ana move kwenda hivi either with a certain acceleration A ambayo inaweza kawa ni value fulani au inaweza kawa zero. Anaweza kawa na move with constant velocity. So huku kutakuwa kuna force inayo pull kumrudisha, ambayo inaitwa ni FK, kinetic friction. Kwa hiyo kinetic friction mara nyingi huwa tunaionaje? Kwamba huyu block kama na move, tukiachia tu hii force tusiendelee kuvuta, tutakuta huyu block amesimama. Kwa nini anasimama? Sababu kuna kinetic friction inayomvuta kurudi nyuma. So that is the major reason why the block atasimama in condition ambayo tumeacha kuvuta, because of the presence of kinetic friction ambayo ana resist motion. Static friction ana resist ku start motion. Kinetic friction ana resist motion ikiwa imeshaanza. So kinetic friction F will be is equal to mu R, mu K R. F will be is equal to mu K, and R will be is equal to mg in this case. That is how we'll get the kinetic friction between these two surfaces. So the coefficient of dynamic friction is typically denoted as mu K, and is usually less than the coefficient of static friction mu S. So mu K is the coefficient of kinetic friction, which is usually smaller as compared with the mu S. Kwa mu S ni static, mu K ni kinetic. Ndio maana nikwambia tunavyokuwa tunataka kuanzisha motion ya kitu, tunatakiwa tutumie nguvu kubwa kuliko tunavyokuwa tunataka ku maintain motion. When we are maintaining motion, that means we are using kinetic friction. But when we are starting motion, it is static friction. So since friction is always exerted in a direction that opposes movement, dynamic friction always does the negative work. Dynamic friction inafanya kama inakipull kitu kwa nyuma. When this body is moving to this direction, dynamic friction is doing as if it's pulling it back. So nachokisema ni kwamba the dynamic friction Fk of a solid interface is given by F is equal to coefficient of kinetic friction times normal reaction R. So the value of coefficient of friction depends on the nature of surface, and mu K is always less than mu S for all surfaces. So I have already explained that the values of these mu that are coefficient of friction depends on the nature of the surfaces. Na unachotakiwa kujua tu ni kwamba kila body hata iwe ni gari iwe ni baiskeli inatembea, huwa inakuwa na frictional force. Kila body, ni gari inatembea, ni baiskeli inatembea, ina frictional force. And if you want to know that, kama ni unaendesha baiskeli, ukinyonga, yani ukaona nani zile pedals, ukainyonga, then if you reach a point, hata kama sio mlimani, lakini ukaiacha tu, usiendelee kunyonga, itatembea lakini itafika point itastop. Why will it stop? It is because of the presence of kinetic friction. Presence of kinetic friction ambayo ina act between the tires of the battery and of the bicycle and the road, and then finally that kinetic friction will lead to loss of energy, and finally the bicycle will stand. So bicycle itaweza kufanya chochote. Kwa hiyo hivyo ndivyo ambavyo friction ipo, ndivyo ambavyo friction inakuwa. Kwa hiyo tunachokisema ni kwamba generally it requires less force to keep an object moving at a constant velocity than to start moving. Manake to keep an object moving tunahitaji kuweza ku overcome kinetic friction ambayo ni ndogo. Lakini to start an object moving, to start an object moving tunahitaji ku overcome kinetic friction. So kama tatu tunajua kwamba the static friction is greater than the kinetic friction. So to start an object moving will be difficult as compared with to keep an object moving with constant velocity. So to set the object in motion, we must overcome the force of static friction. To keep it moving, we must overcome the force of kinetic friction. To set the object in motion, we must overcome force of static friction. Manake ili kitu kianze kumove, we must overcome static friction ambayo ni kubwa. But to keep it moving, we must overcome the force of kinetic friction ambayo ni ndogo. So once an object is in motion, the kinetic friction remains constant as independent of the object's velocity as long as it does not become very large. Kwa hiyo kinetic friction haitegemei kwenye body's velocity, haitegemei kwenye body's velocity. Kwa hiyo kifupi tu kuhusu hizo kinetic friction na static friction ni hivyo. In the next session we'll discuss about the coefficients of friction, and then you can discuss about the body on the inclined plane. Vile ambavyo inaweza ikawa ina exert this frictional force. So yeah, thank you and let I wish you nice studies.